Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Meet the Music. I am your host, Tom Corley. This week's episode is fantastic. I mean, I don't know how to say it other than that this is going to be a great series on gospel music. Last, we started off with Dr. Deborah Smith-Pollard. Now we have Professor Robert Darden, and to follow behind him, we have some prizes. So let's get started. So our guest... really, I found him on the internet by just searching out. And the first thing I came across is his book, People Get Ready, A New History of Black Gospel Music. In addition to that book, he has over 24 books on this subject. He is a founder of Black Gospel Music Restoration Project at Baylor University, Go Bears, the world's largest initiative to digitize, scan, and catalog America's fast vanishing legacy of gospel vinyl from gospel golden age. He and his team provided a gospel music for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And he recently contributed to the two-part, which is about 4 hours, documentary for the PBS with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., The Black Church, This Is My Story, This Is My Song, Professor Robert Darden. He's a journalist, public relations, new media. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, you are our first Baptist deacon. You are our second editor for Billboard magazine, and you've won so many teaching and research awards. My goodness. And you have a partial host to a podcast of your own. Professor Darden, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I generally start with, the trying to get our listeners familiarization with the genre or the style of music that we're going to be talking about. So can you just walk us through that?
Absolutely. The spirituals and gospel music and later freedom songs are the foundational music for pretty much all American music. These genres come directly from Africa, the voice and the rhythm. The folks that came, the enslaved peoples, brought with them this extraordinarily creative music that had been performed in various forms throughout Western and Southern Africa for thousands of years. And when they get here, one of the first things the slave owners tried to do was separate them so that there were no two slaves who had the same language on a plantation. They just tried to destroy their art, tried to destroy literature, everything they could. And the only thing that survived was the music, and that was in part because these were really smart people. The civilizations in Western Africa were way ahead of Western Europe through much of the last 2,000 years. For instance, there were countries in Western Africa that had postal systems, running water, standing militaries. They had all kinds of administrative processes. They had established literature. So they were smart people. So they convinced the slave owners that if you just let us have our music, then we'll work better for you. We'll work faster for you, and you'll make more money. And it's within that music that they created a body of literature comparable to the Iliad, the Odyssey. It was music they used not just for spiritual edification, but for regular education, for teaching songs, counting songs. They used these songs primarily to get them over. But the thing that's most fascinating to me was how all these seemingly innocuous spirituals, Oh, Mary, don't you weep, Go Down Moses, and all of the others, were actually what Henry Louis Gates called a double voicedness to them. They had one message for the slave owners, but for the enslaved people, they had something entirely different. And it was that second message, that protest message, that we're just now unraveling, that I find so utterly compelling, that it could serve two things at the same time. So as finally Christianity is introduced to these people throughout the South, they were told one thing and one thing only: slave, obey your masters. But again, these are smart folks. They sat outside the churches. They sat outside the windows when the master read to his child. And they cobbled together something very similar to the first century Christianity. very much closer to the original Church of Jesus, based around love and based around acceptance. And that was the basis of what would become gospel music. So you take the music of Africa and you add this Christian message, basically evangelical and of love. And as the beat becomes more and more pronounced, it goes from the spirituals to an arranged version, the Fifth Jubilee singers called Jubilee. And finally, with the era of Thomas Dorsey, and as the Great Migration had taken so many African Americans north, the beat becomes the beat of Saturday night with a message of Sunday morning. And that, I think, in 45 seconds is gospel music.
Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate that. So I understand that you are a military dependent, and so that's how you got your exposure. So can you kind of elaborate on your exposure?
Sure. One of the great joys of my life was growing up as what we call military brat in the United States Air Force. And my father spent 37 years in the Air Force, and we traveled the world. But the Air Force was the lone service that was founded integrated. The others fought, were segregated right up into the 70s in the case of the Navy in some places. And so my friends on either side of me in the base housing could well be African American. And so when they would come into my house, they would hear Perry Como and movie themes and Andy Williams. But when I would go in their houses, they would be playing the Mighty Clouds of Joy and the Soul Stirrers and the Dixie Hummingbirds. And I just fell in love with the music. And from there on to rhythm and blues, and particularly soul music, which was also being played in the late 60s in these homes, all of which I still have my 45s from. And it just became the soundtrack of my life. I formed several bands. As Tom can see over my shoulder, I have a Gretsch drum set, my latest baby.
Okay.
And I would be the only white guy in bands, wrote about Black music through college, and then went into newspapers where I was arts and entertainment editor of daily newspapers, and finally became gospel music editor for Billboard magazine when they added that column at long last, and had a weekly column for more than a decade, both on contemporary Christian and gospel. But I did the contemporary Christian so I could do the gospel.
Yeah. So let me back up for a second. In regards to the genre or the style of music, how did you find yourself initially starting with hymnals, or it was straight into gospel as a contemporary sound that was kind of had of a bluesy, rhythmic sound to it?
Good question. In the military, we have chaplains, and they rotate about every year. So we had a different faith nearly every year. We had a lot of Lutherans for some reason, but we had something different every year, black and white. So I don't ever really remember getting a particular attachment to a particular hymn or hymn style. The Air Force hymnal was pretty generic. But I do remember being particularly attracted to the songs written by Andre Crouch. And even the whitest hymnal has 3 or 4 or 5 Andre Crouch songs in it, even now. And being somebody, I guess because I thought I was going to go into journalism someday, who reads bylines on stories and reads who wrote different hymns, I was aware of that name at a very young age. And I can remember on one of the last days before we left Japan, listening to Armed Forces radio and hearing "Oh Happy Day" by the Edwin Hawkins Singers. And I had been aware that this music was the music of the church, but this was the first time I'd heard that it had a wider application.
Let me jump in here real fast, because I usually bug all my guests. Are you a liner notes kind of a guy?
Every word. I know who drew and inked every comic book, and I know who played on every album that I have. And I have had a lot of albums. Yes.
Okay. All right. So in that sense, we are kindred spirits, I guess, because I am a nerd for liner notes.
Yep.
All right. So you mentioned several times you've written and started in college, I guess. And but what was the spark for? I mean, well, I guess let's say, let me ask this question: did you grow up in the Southwest or Southeast area over there, or no? So, what was your last duty station? I guess before you became a teenager.
Oh gosh, we lived in 13 different places. So we were in Japan from 67 to 69, so seventh grade to ninth grade. Then we go to deep East Texas, north of Beaumont for a year. And then in 11th grade, I moved to Alexandria, Virginia, when my dad starts working at the Pentagon. And then after a year there, I asked my parents if I could move back to Woodville and live with my grandmother. So I had 3 different high schools.
Now, Woodville, where's that at?
Woodville is between
I mean,
Beaumont
what's
and Lufkin. It's far extreme southeast Texas, near the
Texas?
Louisiana
Okay,
border.
Okay, all right. Because this
And-
is where I'm going with this question here.
Yeah.
Gospel. How come or why not Zydeco or Cajun music or bluegrass or Americana or the blues? I mean, why not one of those subjects is something that you fell in love with? I mean, because that's the region, right? Zydeco and all those things are out of that kind of the region.
Yeah.
Or even jazz.
Mm-hmm.
For you, what was the spark?
Spark was, I think, all those years we lived on base and being around African American kids, and that was the music they were playing. I was too young to be with the airmen and NCOs who were doing the jazz and the other stuff, but this in their homes, gospel and particularly soul music were the secular and the religious music that I heard, and it just very early became, just my personal soundtrack. I still have the comic books from that era, and I still have the 45s, and I'm looking yesterday for my copy of the Chambers Brothers, which has The Time Has Come Today on one side, but the side I loved was the flip side, an a cappella version of People Get Ready.
The Smithsonian.
Yeah.
How did that all come about?
I don't want to get too esoteric on you here, Tom, or too religious, but God's hand's been a lot of this stuff, because I'm sure not smart enough to have made a connection with the Smithsonian. I'm thinking as they in the early stages were planning the different levels, and if you've been there, it's both sequential from a chronological standpoint, and then it also is broken up by education, military, music, entertainment. And as they were putting together the gospel music section, they were understaffed and underfunded for so long as they were building this thing. And frankly, if you already have some way to access digital copies of all this music, it's a whole lot easier than having to send out precious resources to track it down, because just as you know, the copyright and licensing stuff can take you years, particularly on things that are 60 years old and everybody's dead and the label has crashed a long time ago. Mm-hmm. I think they had heard me on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. Somebody mentioned that one time. And then People Get Ready, by the way, is still in print and still being used in many schools, which I didn't expect at the time.
What's the translation on that? Is it just in English only, or?
I don't know. The authors are the last to know how many they sell and where they go. That's certainly the last to know how they work out royalties for that. And I had just started on the second set of books, Nothing But Love in God's Water, Black Sacred Music from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement. So I had been doing a lot of research at DC at the time, including at the Smithsonian. And I think from several different ways it must have come to them, and they invited me to fly out, and I took our audio engineer, because I'm just an old journalist. I don't know how to work any of these beautiful toys we have. And we told him what we had and what we could do, and the director said to his team, make it happen. And they sent us a list of wanted 500 most important, best, most influential gospel songs, which nearly killed me. And then a year later, they said, can you narrow that down to 100? Which, by the way, is a whole lot harder. And then they just kept narrowing it down. And by the end, you're trying to decide between Mahalia Jackson and Clara Ward and Andre Crouch. And came up with the list plus the album jackets and photo, whatever we had, and we digitized and made it available to them.
Yeah. So are you guys still getting assets in? Wow.
Yeah.
And are they coming from all over the world?
Yep. We, I say yes to every invitation to talk about this. To be honest, the best and easiest way for vinyl to come our way, and that includes cassettes and those horrible 8-tracks and other things, is that to do media, Tom, and somebody will hear it and say, wait a minute, I think we've got grandma's LPs up in the attic. Let me go see.
Yeah.
And if people do, contact us and we'll pay for the shipping, digitize them. And if they want the originals back, we'll send the originals back. I don't want to own somebody's precious vinyl, but what I do want to do is harvest this music before the formats deteriorated. And as you know, reel-to-reel, 8-track, and cassettes get worse every year. Vinyl's fairly sturdy compared to them.
Yeah. Well, right now we're fortunate. We're still in the early stages, but we are. We have listeners in 5 continents, and I just looked this morning. We're in 19 countries.
Wonderful.
And so we should be able to have some more come your way with all of that.
Easy to find if you just put my name in gospel music. It almost always, as you found out, will take you here.
Right. So basically, I kind of got going with this challenge. I have this challenge that I do for myself where I listen to different genres of music. And Spotify, I came across this website called Every Noise. And then on Every Noise, there is 5,112 different genres and subgenres of music. In that, if you plug in gospel, there's like 37 different subgenres of gospel, whether it be samba gospel or Ghana or South Africa. So in your research and your exploration, have you come across non-USA gospel music?
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things about this process is how the music goes back and forth. You probably know the story of Come By Here, the old spiritual, which goes to Africa and is turned into Kumbaya and then is brought back to the United States. And it's Kumbaya that survives, not the original Come By Here, because it was so beloved in the audiences that sang it there. Since it all begins in Africa, as you might imagine, various forms of gospel music retain their strength and are particularly popular. Maybe you've heard Lady Smith, Black Mambazo do gospel songs in an a cappella style. Where the biggest hotbeds of gospel have emerged have been primarily in Western Europe and the Japan to Hong Kong, Pacific Rim there. Part of the reason gospel is so big in England, Holland, Germany, France is that the American soldiers took it with them in World War II and later. Why it's so big in the Pacific Rim, once again, American soldiers took it with them in Vietnam and other wars. And then very early gospel artists like Andre Crouch would go. And there's such large African populations in those places, in England, for instance, from the Caribbean, that it just was accepted and embraced. And now there's thousands of choirs, black and white, that sing gospel music, and particularly England, Holland, and Germany, I think, are the 3 biggest hotbeds.
Yeah.
And
also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
They put their own spin on it, which is what's so great about gospel. It continually morphs and changes.
Right.
It keeps the tradition. As long as it's got evangelical lyrics, you can pretty well call it gospel. But yeah, the music continues to the Kirk Franklins of today who have added hip hop and other things to the beat.
Yeah. It was one of the things I also noticed when I did that search on the keyword, worship and praise, spiritual. were, so if you add them all up, it was probably different, about 100 or so,
Yeah.
that popped up. Yeah.
There are a lot of people that would like gospel to be like, bluegrass was, just frozen in time, or Salvation Army, horn bands, just to have it freeze and say, just like in New York City in the 1950s when hard bop comes and all the white critics at Downbeat say, that's not jazz, it can't be jazz. We define jazz. Well, jazz defines itself by how it's played, and gospel music is the same way. It continues to morph and change as people interpret it with each group. Again, evangelical lyrics, without that, then it's, rhythm and blues. But for gospel music, if it has that evangelical beat, for a long time we said there were 8 distinctives of African music, and most of those would appear in gospel music: the call and response, the use of the so-called blue notes, the flatted thirds and things, the different things, the use of commentary on current events, and all the ones that we go. Gospel music can have all or a few of those. And what's great about gospel, now my personal preference is the stuff I grew up with. I love the stuff from the Golden Age, particularly those hard gospel quartets, which is where Wilson Pickett and all those guys come from. And they go back and forth. Sam and Dave and
What's the time period of the Golden Age?
Sure. Typically, they say post World War II to the. Some people say the death of Martin Luther King. Some say the late to the mid 70s, somewhere in there. It could be that. I try to make the argument in my books that it doesn't end with King, although there is a change, not just in the music, but in the movement. As you know, the Black Panther group grows stronger, and the nonviolent people have fallen by the wayside for a time. The Golden Age is almost a pejorative, because gospel music is bigger, sells more, and just as exciting now. I think only old timers call it a Golden Age, but we had to have something for the original grant that we received. So we set it 1945 to about 1975.
Okay. Now, with that Golden Age period, but in that time period, but you also had the church itself going through a fusion or a transformation or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Henry Louis Gates, the Black Church, This Is My Story, This Is My Song, does that so beautifully. The church kind of ebbs and flows as different pressures, not just the Black church, the white church too. But there are times when they're packed with young people, and there are times when only the old saints are in there. And in my mind, and this is just my opinion, is that as the church stays socially relevant by being involved in the lives of its parishioners, whether it's feeding them or supporting them in setting up business, or being as the base for protest as it was during the classic civil rights movement, then it's very, very strong. But when it retreats into itself and it just singing to the choir thinks, then it reaches a period where younger people don't find that particularly compelling. And Gates makes the argument, we're at one of those rising times now, that the church, because of the Black Lives Matter and other the events in politics in the last 4 years, and you can see that in Georgia, is finding its strength all over again. After a time, maybe where it wasn't. I'm not an expert in church history, but I can follow the music, and gospel music is cresting right now. There are more gospel artists out there filling up more venues and selling more music than maybe ever.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the community or the audience is growing, and it's become more youthful. And festivals help, I guess, and like you said, concert venues, that helps. And mega church, they help, with that whole process. So I got your list, but do you have time to
Sure.
tell us why you made the selection that you have?
You'll have to remind me. I don't have the list in front of me.
Yep. So our first one is Mahalia Jackson. Precious Lord, Take My Hand.
Probably the most famous and enduring gospel song of all time is Take My Hand, Precious Lord. Thomas Dorsey, the so-called father of gospel music, wrote that after the tragic death of his wife and new child in childbirth. And it is a kind of like the prototypical gospel song. It's so intimate, so personal. Uh, the melody is based on an old hymn that he sits and writes in a matter of minutes to express this incredible grief that he is feeling. And it has resonated with audiences, white and black, for 70 years. It is one of those songs that you can play just about anywhere, and people will have a memory that it spurs. It's a gorgeous composition, incredibly simple. It's almost like Amazing Grace, and it's just a few notes carefully placed so that nothing gets in the way of this naked plea that, precious Lord, take my hand, because nothing else is going to get me through. Dorsey's songs are made popular in part because they're so good, but partly because he had a very young Mahalia Jackson sing them as they toured the country. And it was through Dorsey that Jackson became the best known gospel singer of all time. Even now, she's kind of the epitome of gospel music for many people. Maybe the greatest voice, I'm not sure about that, certainly the most compelling. And when you put those two things together, because she knew and was close to Dorsey, knew his grief, that it's just a magical, transformative piece of work. And she has multiple versions of it. I like the ones that are a little more simple, but it's a hard song to screw up.
Yeah. I actually can't say that I can remember the last time I actually heard that, when you hear Amazing Grace so much. But now I'm gonna have to listen to it with a different ear.
If you do it's played in the black church like Amazing Grace is played in the white church.
So, okay. So you have Edwin Hawkins, Hawkins Singers. Oh, Happy
Day. Another one based on a much older hymn. Hawkins has a youth choir. They need money to go on a tour, the choir concert. And they throw this together in a few hours in a makeshift studio. And it pulls together all of the different threads that gospel music had kind of been stalled out, waiting to go to what we would now call contemporary gospel music. Andre Crouch is already doing that and will soon become the figure that does it. But this song is so unique because not only is it the spear point between one side and the other, it also becomes the first and only gospel song to become, number one hit around the world. And I've heard versions in dozens of languages, and it's never gets old, and partly because, once again, these are not professional musicians. This is done strictly out of a sense of joy and a level of polished amateurism that gives it an excitement that is it just doesn't age. It still sounds good today. And yes, that was a period when Jesus music was beginning, and Godspell and other things. There was a more receptive audience for this kind of music. But Oh Happy Day thrills people, secular, Christian, Jewish, Muslim. Everybody loves that song.
Right. Yeah. I have a kind of a funny story that goes with that. I went to church with my grandmother. My parents didn't really frequent the church that much, so I would always go with my grandmother. And so the times I went to her church, it was, kind of calm. And I, being a child, I didn't want to be there. But I grew up on a block where a family of, 6 kids, and I became like the adopted 7th kid. And I went to their church. I heard their mom's choir sing this song, and I thought they were the group who made that song.
Yeah.
Because every church practically probably sung it. But I thought they were the original singers. And I thought, wow, they're superstars, because you heard it on the radio, you heard it everywhere. And I kind of look back on that, and laugh about it, because I thought they were the original group.
That's not an odd mistake. If you go in most cities in America, and if you'll find the top Kojic, Church of God in Christ church, you'll find probably the best choir, because they pay well for their choirs. So I bet that choir you heard was damn good.
Yeah.
They always have been, in my experience. I churches. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I learned something about the choirs in the churches, and Mr. Dr. Gates's documentary the other night. I learned some
Yep.
things about that. Yeah. Okay, so next we have Hezekiah Walker, "Every Praise."
A lot of old timers, old codgers like me, having trouble getting into praise and worship music. Uh, the old hymns and the gospel music, the lyrics have been part of my edification and my instruction my whole life. And praise and worship is so one dimensional in so many ways. But Hezekiah Walker was not going to be deterred. And he takes the basic praise and worship format, turns it into probably the most tuneful gospel song, and has the brilliant idea of recording it and the video live in downtown Birmingham in the one neighborhood that's both black and white, the Five Corners neighborhood, as a kind of a street performance. What am I trying to say? Not a pop-up concert. I've lost the word. Where kids show up and all of a sudden start singing.
I'm losing it too. I can't think of it either.
Everybody but you and I know what that word is.
Right.
And a
Flash mob.
Flash mob. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like a flash mob. I'll write that down. And it becomes an internet sensation. It's a heck of a great tune, but it's essentially gospel music with a praise and worship overlay. And Hezekiah Walker in his beautiful suit stands in the middle, and like Kirk Franklin, doesn't really sing much, mostly directs, and it's the choir doing all the work. But it goes back to Oh Happy Day. It goes back to Mattie Moss Clark and the choirs, and it also updates the instrumentation. So it's a wonderful bridge, and it's a great entry drug for people interested in gospel music.
Yeah, I totally agree. It would be the one that you say, okay, if you want to listen to some gospel, start here. Yeah. Okay, so Swan, Silverstone, Oh Mary, Don't You Weep.
I picked that one because it's an old spiritual, one of the oldest that we know of. And as you know, the Virgin Mary has nothing to do with Pharaoh, but the spirituals would take different couplets from other spirituals. Again, they're putting together a theology at this point. They aren't allowed to read, don't have a copy of the Bible. And most of the spirituals are written in what John Devell calls the eternal now. They think the events in the Bible that they're hearing are taking place across in the next county line. So many of them are in the first person present tense. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, it causes me to tremble. So, oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. And so not only is it that protest music, Pharaoh being obviously the Confederacy and South, it's an ancient song. And the Swan Silvertones are one of the 10 great quartets. So you're going to hear those pinpoint perfect harmonies that you only get from traveling to 200 dates a year in a Cadillac, 250,000 miles, 5 large black men in a car who have nothing else to do but polish their harmonies as they sing, and recorded again in a few hours, and has become one of the most recorded old gospel song spirituals. If you go on YouTube, you'll find hundreds of copies from everybody from Bruce Springsteen to opera singers. And so it was a nice up-tempo introduction to spirituals to somebody who doesn't know what a spiritual is, and my particular little favorite subgenre, quartet singing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the quartet singing, the doo-wop singing, or whatever, it falls into that. Yeah.
The doo-wop, all of that comes out of the church.
Yeah. Okay, Marion Williams.
Marion Williams, yeah.
Yeah, They Led My Lord Away.
That's another ancient spiritual, and he never said a mumbling word is the second line of that. Probably people would know that more. Here's where I get in trouble when I'm called to Black organizations and Black churches to talk about it. And somebody always says, well, who's your favorite singer in gospel music? And the correct answer is Mahalia Jackson. But from my personal point of view, it was Marion Williams. The last time I did that here in town at a a Black woman's Bible study. I said Marion Williams, and everybody sat back, and I got the finger waggle. And so I knew better to never do that again in a Black congregation. Marion Williams does things with her voice. Had she gone into pop or soul or any other music, I think she would have been a superstar. Jazz people and music theory and composition people listen to her and say, I don't know how she got from here to there. It's some kind of a native genius like Mozart. Then this version of They Led My Lord Away, which is, again, an ancient spiritual, it's recorded on a cassette tape in somebody's living room for an album of a cappella singing. And she was already down. She had uh, diabetes. She'd lost a leg. She was working for pennies in a soup kitchen. And she sits and sings from her heart with no accompaniment. And this song has a haunting resonance that is heightened by the fact she's going to be dead in another year or two. But during her long career, which goes back to the Clara Ward singers and so many other groups, she was one of the dominant voices and certainly one of the creative geniuses of gospel music.
Yeah. So in the last one we have here is Andre Crouch. He looked beyond my fault and saw my need.
I may have mentioned that I am, for my hopefully last book, because I'm getting old here, on gospel music, I decided to do the other member of Mount Rushmore of gospel, which would be Andre Crouch. Andre wrote hundreds of songs, many of which are still in lively play around the world. And he didn't write this one. It was written by Dottie Rambo. But in it encapsulates a couple things that I think are important. One, it's based on the old Irish melody Londonderry Air, which you probably know as Danny Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And Dottie Rambo puts religious lyrics over it, and Andre and the disciples interpret it as what, just like, John Coltrane or somebody doing My Funny Valentine, taking something and transforming it into something new altogether and something transcendent. It's also a song that I think encapsulates what's so great about gospel music and the Black church in general, is that this sense of it isn't about judgment. It isn't about we're all going to go to hell. It's what he, meaning God, looked beyond my fault and saw my need and was able to minister me where I was. And for people who had been in bondage for long, people who've been in segregation and Jim Crow for so long, and people who can't even let their teenage son drive in the streets of America without fear that he's going to get shot. This kind of message is particularly poignant. And Andre and the disciples do a marvelous job. And again, there's plenty of other versions of it. But it's what gospel music does. It pulls from different threads and different aspects and different themes, and it creates something new and special, again, with that evangelical lyric. And Andre wrote so many classic songs through it all. Soon and very soon, the blood will never lose its power. To God be the glory. Mm-hmm. And this one he didn't write, but it is every bit an Andre Crouch song when he was finished.
Right. Yeah. Wow. I mean, this is why I'm so passionate about this project. I mean, have an opportunity to expose myself and listeners to the background of a genre of music, because now I have this list and I can let it play and let it wash over me as I listen to it, because I mean, my playlist is up all up and down the dial. I'm listening to Kenny Chesney 1 week and listening to a Coltrane for a month, and and then I'm listening to Aretha Franklin for Marvin Gaye, for Motown sound for the whole summer. So I appreciate it, Professor Darden, this time that you've given us, and I appreciate you sharing all this knowledge with us.
My pleasure. That's it's hard not to love this music, and even the worst racists you've seen through the years who exposed to this music can hate everything else, but has real trouble hating this music. And I think because it carries with it all of this undertones of all the pain and loss and suffering and triumph, like few other kinds of music do. There is this unbroken, almost apostolic succession from the spirituals through gospel and freedom songs through today. Because every gospel artist, contemporary artist I've talked to is a passionate fan of the people who came before and can name you the liner notes of all those albums too. And they nurture and carry these traditions. And they may do these big songs and the big shows at the mega churches and the venues, but when they go home to their home church, and many of them are pastors, by the way. I've talked to Marvin Winans in the last few weeks, who's a pastor of a big church in Detroit. And it's these songs that they sing, the older ones that continue to nurture and are introducing them to a whole new generation.
Wow, there was so much information packed into that episode. I want to thank Professor Robert Darden for sharing the story of gospel music and adding to our series, The Many Styles of Christian Music. You can listen to our show on our website at meetthemusic.buzzsprout.com, Apple, Deezer, Google Podcasts, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us on our musical journey. Remember, if it's Monday, it's Meet the Music.